Hello and welcome to episode 144 of Page One, the Writers Podcast. I'm Marco.
I'm Tarek.
And thanks for joining us on the podcast where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, find out how they got into the industry and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And last week we spoke with Karen Swan about her Christmas set book, and we continue with that Christmas theme this week.
Yeah, this week we're chatting with Jenny Bayliss, who was a former professional cake baker and made the jump into writing with a 1-2 punch, actually, of Christmas novel and middle grade adventure.
Yeah, it's interesting because she'd been in, like so many writers, she'd been in the trenches of trying to get picked up, find an agent and all that for years, and then suddenly she gets this, as you say, 1-2 punch. She got the Christmas book picked up, which went to a bidding war, and almost at the same time, the first of her middle grade books, Malice in Underland, which I have to say is a great title.
That's brilliant, isn't
it? Was also picked up. So, we speak to her about that and about the journey that she's had to get here. And it's a really interesting chat. She's really good fun to chat with. And obviously, we talk about her latest Christmas book as well, which is very timely, obviously.
Meet Me Under the Mistletoe.
Yes. Well,
that's the name of the book,
if
Marco,
you insist, but we'll get straight into the interview after a quick advert for our writer's notebook, and then we'll be back at the end of the episode to let you know about a very special episode next week.
But for now, on with the podcast.
The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realise it's not just a story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with page one.
Did you always want to be a writer? Because I know you had a couple of other careers before you turned to writing.
I did always want to be a writer. And, the universe just isn't always on the same page as you. And so I had to sort of wait until it was my time. So I was writing sort of forever, writing, all the time, and just not getting anywhere. And sort of while my, kids were small, I was sort of, it's one of those like guilty pleasures, when because you felt, because I didn't have anything published. So I felt guilty for writing, but at the same time, I really wanted to write. So every time, one of the kids closed their eyes, I'd be scribbling away, or, and I'd send things off. And I mean, this is back in the days when you would send things by post, it wasn't even email submissions. It's like a long time ago.
Stamped addressed envelope and stuff like that.
Absolutely, yes, all of that. And then waiting for them to come back, and then you divide your rejections into good rejections and bad rejections.
I mean, how do you say, during all that time, There must have been times where you heard nothing back and thought, has it just been lost in the post? I'll just send it again, just in case it hasn't arrived.
Yeah, loads of times. And then, because it wasn't like, now everyone just pings an email. And there was like, so it was like nail biting. I'd send off like 4 different sort of agents, and then you're like waiting, and every day you're waiting for the clump on the doormat that's either going to be, usually, your manuscript back in my case. And I couldn't understand, just nothing. It wasn't happening. And then I realized now with hindsight, one of them, I wrote a children's story and I sent it to Usborne, and it got through to the full manuscript phase. This is like 20 years ago. And it came back to me and they said, we really like it. It's just running a little bit slow at the moment. And because I had no training in writing, I just thought it was a rejection. I didn't realise that's jumping off point. Yeah. You edit that, don't you?
Yeah.
And also I had no idea how to edit. So, so I had things like that where now I think, gosh darn it.
It's a whole different world now, though, isn't it? Having the internet is such a great tool for writers that are trying to break in, because you can all this kind of facts like this is you can easily find beforehand. It must be. I can't imagine what it was like not having the internet to help with this kind of thing.
No, that's it. I used to borrow the writer's and artist's guide from the library.
Yeah.
And that's how I used to find who I was going to send to. But that even that can't really teach you how to edit, properly. Mm-hmm. Which is clearly what I needed. And then it wasn't until I was sort of 39. So, you could say midlife crisis. And I sort of was like, right, I've been doing this for years. I've got, something's got to give. So I was obviously still working, but I started a degree and did that part-time. So it took like 6 years. And that was when I realised how to edit, because there's nothing quite like writing something and then having a lecturer standing over your shoulder, reading it and going, yeah, it's good. Now cut it by 30%. Yeah. And then, and you're like, oh, that's how that works. That's why they call it murdering your babies.
Yeah. Yeah. So what course was that you did then?
I went to Christchurch Uni in Canterbury, and I did creative and professional writing.
Excellent. And so after that course, is that when you sort of had for this act 2, I guess, of your writing career in a way?
Yeah, it was, because so again, it's the universe is sort of threw me a bit of a curveball. So I was working as a baker, which I did 3 days a week, and then did uni twice a week. Had an amazing boss who would just let me swap my days every term, because not many bosses would let you keep doing that. And then because I've been baking for so many years, a disc in my neck prolapsed onto my spinal cord. So this caused a few problems, and obviously I couldn't bake. So I was waiting for surgery, and then I had surgery, and then I became unemployed because I just couldn't bake anymore. So I was in a situation where I was finishing my degree, unemployed, and then I thought, this is the time to write, the Christmas novel that I've been telling myself I'm going to write for years. And so I wrote that, and then I did manage to get another job in a jeweler's, actually, so I could sort of sit and not bake, and then that book got picked up. And I think if I hadn't have had that time where I couldn't work, I probably wouldn't have written that manuscript.
Yeah.
And then, and then the rest is history. And my children's book, weirdly, is based on my dissertation for my degree. So it was like this really strange period of being, unemployed and sick and doing a degree, and and then everything happened all at once. So I was 46 and I had 2 books published, and you're like, oh.
And so that is interesting that you had the 2 books almost simultaneously picked up, presumably. I mean, what was it? The Christmas book, the 12 Dates of Christmas, was that the one that got you an agent?
Yes, that was, and by that time, you're so sort of, I don't know, not relaxed about sending stuff off, but when you've had as many rejections as I have, you become a bit sort of, like, I'll just send that off. And then when it came back, and Hayley at Madeline Milburn said, yeah, I'm interested in this. And then you're like, oh. And then I didn't know what to do, because that's never happened before.
Yeah.
So, and it went from there.
I mean, how many books had you sent off before the Christmas one was picked up? Did you see how many you tried?
Let me think. I mean, I probably wrote 7 to 10 children's books. I wrote a couple of young adult books. And I was, sort of, and other bits in between. And so, yeah, I mean, I've got to be talking 80 odd rejections.
Wow.
Easy,
And when you look back at, obviously the 12 Days of Christmas was the one that kind of broke through. And when you look at that book compared to your previous efforts, do you see a difference between them? Like, is it obvious to you why that book was picked up when others weren't? Or is it a case of luck and timing, you think?
I think a lot of it's timing. I think a lot of it's luck. You've got to land on the right desk at the right time. Mm-hmm. Because I'm sure sort of, there probably were plenty of, a few years back, vampire writers who wrote really great vampire stories that people wouldn't have been interested because there'd been so much vampire stuff before, so you've got to sort of hit the right mark at the right moment, I think. Yeah, I think so. That was a lot to do with it, and the editing. Obviously, I knew how to edit. Yeah,
always helpful.
Yeah.
and so from that book being picked up, did you secure did Hayley get you a deal quite quickly after that?
Yes. So I did some rewrites. It wasn't big enough. The manuscript wasn't quite big enough. So I did some rewrites and we worked on that. And then she said, like, it's ready. And she sort of put it out for submission, and then there was a bidding war, which again, that's one of those things you're just like, I mean, is this actually happening? It's like, so and it got picked up by Pan Macmillan, which was amazing. So yeah, it's I still don't quite believe it, even like now. And I'm so, every single time someone like says, oh, I bought your book, I'm so grateful, because you've done it for so many years and hoped and wished, and now it happens, and I don't think I'll ever be taking that for granted.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, actually the podcast that's just coming out this week, in fact, the guest there, Richard Swan, we spoke to him about it can often seem like with a debut they suddenly come out of nowhere and they've had this great success and stuff like that, but there's nearly always this huge body of work and attempts to write and rejections and all that behind them that you don't see, obviously, as the reader at that point.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it does completely look like you just suddenly woke up one day and wrote a book and then it got picked up. It looks sort of easily done, doesn't it? And then and for some people, some people are really lucky and they're getting picked up in their 20s.
Yeah.
And that's great, and they're having this huge, sort of long career. By the time they've got to my age, they're veterans. But yeah, for a lot of us, it's like just steady plodding, lots of rejections, and hoping.
Yeah.
And why, obviously 12 Days of Christmas came out, and you've written two more books set in the Christmas genre, because I guess it is a genre on its own, I suppose, the kind of festive books.
It kind of has been, yeah. I think that's a genre that sort of exploded quite recently. I think it was beginning to be a little bit of a thing, certainly in America, not so much over here. And then I think COVID happened, and everyone was just reaching for sort of hope. And things that were taking them out of the situation that we all found ourselves in, and I think that sort of really helped to push the Christmas side of things.
And how does it feel to be a writer in that genre? Is that something that, I mean, obviously, was that an area that you wanted to, was a Christmas book something you wanted to write for a while? Was that an area that you're happy to be in, or is it something which you would like to kind of write a bit, try your hand at something else as well?
I think I would like, I mean, the trouble with me is I would like to try my hand at everything. I hadn't really, because I'd written lots of different sort of genres and for different age groups. I hadn't, in actual fact, the 12 Dates of Christmas was the first rom-com that I'd ever written. So that could also tell you that I probably should have done that 20 years ago. And because I'd always thought that I'd write sci-fi, or, you know, Gothic, very sort of, you know, Victorian Gothic, and that sort of thing. And yeah, and it turns out that, and I wrote this because the reason I wrote the Christmas book was because me and my mum at Christmas, we always we choose a book each, a Christmassy rom-com, and then we read it, and then we swap, and then we have like a little book club about it. And it's like our little Christmas escape. Yeah. So I thought, oh, I've got this idea, I'm going to write this Christmas book. And I didn't, as I say, I obviously sent it off, but in my mind, I'd had so many rejections that I hadn't really seriously considered that it would get picked up. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's just lucky that I really like Christmas. So I seem to have endless amounts of Christmas to write about. Yeah, but that wasn't necessarily my intention. I didn't sort of, you know, from the age of dot, decide that I wanted to write Christmas rom-coms.
Yeah. But as well, having, you know, written all these books and made the attempts to get an agent and obviously got the rejections, like many authors do, most authors in fact. What is it that kept you going at that point? Because, you know, getting rejections certainly at first can be quite, you know, depressing. It puts you off. Almost some people don't want to look at their manuscript again and all this sort of stuff. I mean, what is it that motivated you to think, well, I'm just going to try again. I'm going to write something new. I'm going to send it out. I'm going to and keep at it. What was that?
I think, I mean, stubbornness. But also, I think I was always going to be writing. Mm-hmm. And, you know, just sort of, I realised that whatever happened, no matter how many rejections I got, I still had more stories to write. I still wanted to write. I was still stealing every moment I could to write. Yeah. So if you're doing that anyway, you might as well be sending them off. Mm-hmm. You know, that was sort of how I thought about it. And as I say, I'm quite stubborn. And so the more people tell me no, the more I think, yeah, well, wait till I write this.
I mean, when you do write these books, because I kind of want to go into the kind of like the process of writing with you for a little bit, and a Christmas book must have certain elements that like a reader expects to be in it, you know.
Christmas.
I don't want to call them, Christmas for them. Snow. I don't want to call them cliches, but they're stuff that people want to be in them. It's like it's what they expect. And is that something which you worry you would get bored with, or is it quite fun thinking up new ways to put the same things in a different twist?
Yeah, I mean, I think the rules they're fairly broad. I mean, you do really need to have a happy ending. You know, that kind of is the way with any rom-com, really. You want to have a happy ending. But other than that, I think certainly with my books, I walk a bit of a tightrope between women's fiction and romance. And so quite often, because romance tends to be, it can be much faster, much more dialogue, less description. So sometimes I get comments like, well, that's women's fiction, that's not romance. Okay. So I do sort of walk this sort of a bit of but I think walking that tightrope does give me a little bit more leeway, because it means that I can touch on maybe slightly more serious subjects within that realm of the Christmas rom-com.
Yeah.
And when you're writing a rom-com as well, obviously there's the romance side of things, but there's also the comedy side of things. And is there, you know, if you're setting your book or story out to be that type of story, do you feel a sort of pressure to be funny? Because obviously comedy is one of the hardest things to write. It's very subjective. Or is it just something that you naturally are able to put in your stories?
I don't think I really realised at first that I was writing funny. I think I've probably just got a really ridiculous sense of humour. It's very slapstick, and I think that I must write like that, and so I think so. it sort of was accidental, really. And then once I realized that I could get away with being funny, then that, then I could do that. But then the book I'm writing at the moment for next year was more serious, and I was worried, and I said to my editor, like, I'm a bit concerned, this is not really funny. And she was like, well, maybe this one won't be. That's fine. You don't, that's okay. So yeah, I don't know. It either, I don't know. It either happens or it doesn't.
Yeah, fair enough.
And when you sit down to actually write your book, do you like to have a kind of plan in front of you to know exactly where you're going, where everyone's going to end up, how the book's going to end, or do you like to kind of pants it a little bit and just see what happens?
I tend to know how it's going to start, and I tend to know how it's going to finish, and sometimes I know what's going to happen in the middle, and then most of the time it's the start and the end, and I'll have a scene in my head, and I'll be like, oh, that's how it's going to end, and then I have to get there, and so that's so I'm probably not very good at I don't really map things out until I get much later on, and then I've realized I have to write myself a timeline, because I'm absolutely shocking. I can fit 72 hours in a 24-hour period in a book. So I have to be really like strict with myself. So the wrapping paper that you get Amazon parcels in, it's really long. Yeah. I stretch that out and then I write my timeline. Because I've realised that's the only way I can do it, because I'm so shocking.
And do you, when you're actually writing the book itself, do you set yourself like a word target every day, or a certain amount of time every day, or what is your process in that sense?
I'm quite lucky at the moment now, at the moment I say, because I touch wood, because you never know, that I can do it full time. So that means I can devote time every day to it. At the moment, I'm devoting a lot of time because it's deadline season. I try and this is another thing. You see, I always feel bad because I see people on Twitter and stuff like that, and they'll be like, oh, bashed out 8,000 words today. And I always think,
so demoralizing.
Because I have to sort of think, right, just go by your own limits. So I think if I get 1,500 good words, and by good words, I mean not just fancy words, but words that are going to stay in my manuscript, I'm happy. So 1,500 words a day, which doesn't seem like much, but I think if they're good words, then it's okay. But don't think I have ever made, apart from maybe when I was at uni and I was cramming late at night, been able to bash out 8,000 good words in a day. I mean,
I don't think many people can.
I was going to say, and I wonder how many of those words actually end up staying in the manuscript.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's the thing. Are they good words?
Exactly. Yeah. And do you tend to do a lot of drafts? Do you do a lot of redrafting and then before you finish, or are you quite a clean edit as you go kind of person?
I think some things I'll get down on the page really quickly. Other things I'll spend all day labouring over, 2 or 3 paragraphs. So, and in actual fact, I prefer that is better, because in the end, then when you go back, you're like, oh, I've done those 3 paragraphs. Yeah. So, yeah, I think I can be quite pernickety about things. But yeah, that does make life easier in the long run. But what doesn't make life easier in the long run is that I don't write start to finish. Okay. I write the chapter that I fancy writing, or the.
Oh, right, that's interesting.
And then I put it together at the end like a jigsaw.
That's where the Amazon paper comes in, as you're trying to rearrange everything. Essentially.
Exactly. Yeah.
So you're writing it like a jigsaw, bits and pieces, and then you stitch all together. I mean, I find that stressful just thinking about that, because I imagine I'll get to the end and have all these scenes and they don't quite click. How do you make sure they all work together?
I think the thing is that if I'll sort of know whereabouts in the book that scene's going to go, and I'll think of it. And when I've tried to do it, it's sort of more linear, and thought to myself, no, don't write chapter 15 today because you haven't finished chapter 6. But then my heart won't be in chapter 6 because all I'm thinking about is chapter 15. So I've realised that I have to I'll do what I fancy doing, as it were, and then those because then the next day I'll be like, oh, now I'm all about chapter 6 today, and then I can do it that way. So that seems to work. Sometimes things, I'll have 3 or 4 chapters in a row that I've written, but quite often, especially if it's, and the thing with me is I'm really scatty. So if I think to myself, oh, that'd be great, and even if I write myself a few notes down and go, so I don't forget, I will forget. Yeah. I'll have lost the essence of that. I think to myself, that's brilliant. You won't have forgotten the essence of that. And I really will have when I come to write it. So I have to do it there and then, or it's just gone.
And I suppose if you've written a chapter that's like towards the end of the book, that must help spark ideas back the way when you think, oh, actually, this should happen, but for that to happen, I'll need to have X, Y, Z happen 3 chapters earlier. So you know when you do write those chapters, what to put in them as opposed to like a reverse plan.
Yeah, I think, and I think a lot of it is so that it helps not to have writer's block if you're constantly running away from writer's block by writing another chapter.
Yeah, I can see.
Which is sort of what I'm doing.
So the new book is Me Under the Mistletoe. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yes, so it's about Norrie, who owns a second-hand bookshop in London called Serendipitous Seconds, and she is invited to a week-long sort of house party at a castle near the old private school that she went to. She was a scholarship student, and 2 of her friends from that very fancy school are getting married, and there's a whole gang of them, and they're all getting together for this do, and it's a week house party before her 2 friends get married, and it's all sort of mixed up in, they'd lost touch years ago, but one of their friends took his own life, and it brought them back together, and since then they promised that they wouldn't sort of stray apart again, but they have in their different ways, and it's a lot about enduring friendships and how you snap back into the mold that you were when you were sort of 13, 14, 15, and now you're sort of 35. It's that sort of how people have changed, how they haven't changed, how nostalgia can sort of move things and distort your view of things. And obviously along the way, she then meets, when she's trying to escape some of her friends, she meets what used to be a childhood sort of nemesis, who is now the head gardener at the castle, and they sort of start a romance. And there's some art fraud thrown in, like you do, and so it's a lot about remembering friends that aren't with you anymore, and sort of embracing friendships as they are now, and there's obviously Christmas happening at the same time. So
I mean, and with these books that you're doing, obviously there is the common Christmas theme overall kind of a thing, but it sounds like with each book you're wanting to explore some other themes as well underneath that, while sort of wrapping it in Christmas paper, if you like. See what I did there?
Pun there. I think that's good.
Is that right?
Well, yeah, I think so, because because real Christmas isn't the Christmas that you see on telly anyway, is it? It's family politics, it's sort of, who's going to have Auntie Gwen. It's, it's all that sort of thing. We always hope that there's going to be this sort of chocolate box Christmas. And I for most people, that isn't the case. And so I think you can have Christmas, but you can underpin it with a bit of reality. And then, and people can see maybe their own Christmas in that as well, or their own family dynamic, or so I think there's a lot to play with. But I do, again, this is the whole, walking the tightrope of romance and women's fiction. I have been accused of not being Christmassy enough. So because I've got a story that is set at Christmas rather than a Christmas story. So
okay, yeah. And I mean, how do you come up with your ideas for these ones then? Like, how, obviously you've kind of got that setting, I suppose, or that time of year locked in, I guess. But as Marco says, like, each book seems to be exploring a new idea and a kind of theme. And And do you have an idea of what you want to write about in advance? Have you got a few books in your head or do you kind of just sit down and think I need to come up with a new idea for next year, in the next week or so?
Well, I mean, so far, I've been quite lucky because as I've been finishing one book, I've got a spark of an idea for another book. So that's quite lucky, but I'm touching wood again because you just never know. So far that has been the case. And I think it's easier for me because maybe I'm sort of a slightly older woman writing about slightly older characters than I'm normally in the romance sort of genre. So my characters are sort of, they start at 35 and go up. They don't, there's sort of so I think that gives you a lot greater scope as well, because then you're writing about people that have got baggage. And baggage is always more interesting.
Yeah, totally.
And you also write middle, or classed as middle grade books as well. The Malice and Underland series, which is a great title for a series of books. When you write those, is your approach any different at all in terms of your process or anything like that, or is it just exactly the same, but I'm just writing for a different audience now?
I think with those, I can tend to write more linear, weirdly. I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's because they're shorter. I'm not sure. And I mean, I love writing middle grade as well, because I mean, I love writing adult fiction, but writing middle grade is obviously you just really let your imagination go mad. So, it's really good fun. And I sort of love all the whole process, of it, even the editing. I like editing the adult books as well.
Is it more fun to write these books than the adult ones?
I think it is actually. Well, I mean, I enjoy both because I love writing, but in a way, I suppose when I'm writing the children's books, that feels like a writing holiday, if you know what I mean. And then, so I'm enjoying the both, but one feels like more like you're writing on a holiday, and one feels more like you're writing and you're getting a story down. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
No, it does. And do you take that holiday in between the Christmas books? Like, do you do a Christmas book then a middle grade book? Is that how you sort of structure your writing?
Yeah, that kind of. So they so what happened was the Malice and Underland books have mostly come out in sort of October, but the adult book comes out in November. So what I'm doing is I'm sort of tag teaming books, so I write them separately, but then when it comes to editing, what's happened thus far is that I'll send off one lot of edits for the adult book, and then I'll get the edits through for the children's book. And so I take a couple of days to get my children's head on, and then I jump into that one, and then that's 3 weeks doing that, send that one back, and then the other one comes back, and then I get out of Underland and get into grown-up land. And so it's sort of it's very back and forth. It's quite nice because there's not too much of there's not an overlap as such. I mean, there's no gaps particularly between them coming and going, but there's not really an overlap. The only time that happened was when I threw in a YA book in the same year. So I wrote 3 books in a year.
Wow.
And I'm sure there's people that are much, better at managing their time than me, but I was a mess. So I just did not know whether I was, coming or going.
Yeah. Must be hard to switch the headspace if you're having to do that in terms of the sort of voice of the writing and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's why I always take a couple of days because I've tried it before where I've just gone, like I've sent one off and then the edit for the other one's come in and I've thought, no, I'll just crack straight on, and I can't. I just, and then I, after, many times now of me going, that's it, I've lost it, I just can't do it. I've realised that actually what I need to do is just have a couple of days to let that one settle, clear my mind, start on the next one. But, I like to start with the drama of thinking that I'll never write again.
What are the differences between writing a middle grade novel and an adult novel? Because I mean, a lot of middle grade novels, they deal with a lot of adult themes and kind of situations and stuff, but obviously they're written with I guess it's the voice is aimed at a younger person, but the topics can still be quite adult, I suppose, in nature. So I mean, what do you think the differences are between them? Is it purely the way they're written as opposed to the subject matter?
Yeah, I think it is. I think middle grade books are really underrated. I've read some beautiful middle grade books. I mean, I love, obviously, I think because you have to read what you write, don't you? So I adore middle grade, and I read a lot of it. And I just read one a little while ago called The Haunting of Tyrese Walker, and that's by J.P. Rose. And she wrote this book that was about ghosts and in sort of Jamaica, and it was very scary and everything else. But at its heart, it was about this little boy who had lost his dad, and it was about bereavement. And these ghosts were able to attach themselves to him because he hadn't come to terms with his bereavement. He hadn't allowed himself to cry or miss his dad, and it was just heartbreaking, but wonderful as well. And I think there are so many amazing subject matters in middle grade, but yeah, they're approached differently. But there are a lot of books that I think a lot of adults could do with reading.
Yeah.
Like The Boy at the Back of the Class. I just think every person in the whole country ought to read it. I'm terrible with names when I get nervous, so I can't remember the writer's name. You probably know it. But anyway, just amazing, and I think adults could learn a lot from middle grade books.
And would you ever? You said at the start that you had pictured yourself as a science fiction or gothic horror author. Would you ever want to go back and try those genres again?
I would like to. There is. I wrote a manuscript years ago, which was a sort of gothic-y sort of book about witches. That was a YA book, and I'd really like to pursue that one day. So that sort of is always in the back of my mind, that I'd like to go back with my new found editing head on and see if I could rework that.
Excellent. And so what are you working on just now? What's next? Obviously, we've got Meet Me Under the Mistletoe now, but what's coming out next? Is there another middle grade book out before the next Christmas one?
No, not at the moment. So my contract is finished with Scholastic at the moment. So that was a 3-book thing. So I am I'm thinking about another book that I want to write for middle grade, and just see if that will go back to the beginning and really start sort of putting it out for submission when I've written it. And I'm writing now the next adult book, which is around the winter solstice. So I'm sort of like,
nice.
I sort of, what I've managed to do so far is sort of switch up a bit. So the 12 Dates of Christmas was full Christmas, and then the Winter of Second Chances was actually autumnal, and then the epilogue was in Christmas, and then this one is sort of like around Christmas, and then the next one's going to be the winter solstice. So it's so I'm sort of taking the winter season, more winter and autumn, sort of. But I like winter and autumn; they're my favourite times, so I find that easier to write about. I think the summer just makes me angry, so
so
that would be a terrible book.
Yeah.
The summer of anger.
What about a Christmas book set in Australia?
I see. I would just be permanently hot. All my characters would just be moaning about the heat and the perimenopause. That's how that would
go. What was the last book that you read?
The last book that I read was The Enigma of Room 622, which was, what's his name? Joël. Oh, hang on, I've written it down. Joël Dicker. It was a French book. It was translated, and it was really good. That was like a sort of murdery mystery, but set across a 15-year period. It was really good.
I like the title. It sounds intriguing.
Yeah, it was great. I'd recommend it.
What about the last film that you watched?
Oh, the last film I watched. What was that? Crikey. Oh, Jurassic World Dominion.
Oh, right, okay. That's the third one, isn't it? The new one.
Yeah, that's the new one. Yeah, I was at my sister's and she had that, so I watched that. I love the Jurassic Parks. I'm such a child. I really like dinosaurs.
No, they're brilliant films. Yeah.
Well, the first film was a brilliant film.
First film, yeah, okay. The first one was brilliant. I quite enjoyed Jurassic World, the first one, but
yeah, so did I.
So, how was Dominion?
I thought it was good, and it was quite nice to have, quite nice to have the old team back together. I thought.
I know, that's the draw, isn't it? So it's Sam Neill and stuff back together again. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was good. It was good fun. I like them.
Excellent. And what was the last TV show that you watched or are watching?
We have been watching. I said that like the royal we, me and my husband. I think it's called The White Lotus.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I've heard great things about
we're on the second season of that, which is really good. And we just finished watching The Watcher.
Yeah,
that was good as well.
Is that the one with a really weird ending, or is that the?
I mean, it was quite a weird ending.
The weird ending. I can't remember what it's called. And I think it's The Watcher.
It's where they. It's like
I think I maybe read
mystery.
about it. Yeah, but I think
that's it. Yeah. So there's no resolution.
No, because it was based on a true story, so it's still to this day. It's like yes, it's a mystery.
Is that frustrating? Did you get to the end of it and think, oh, for Christ's sake, was it okay?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I'm hoping that now they've made a whole series about it, someone will, actually work out what did happen.
Yeah.
And then they can do an extra episode.
Right. Well, the very last thing we always do is a super quick fire either or, and I always say there's no right answer here apart from one. But we'll start off with rom-com or gothic horror.
I've got to say rom-com.
Fair enough.
TV or cinema?
TV.
Night owl or early bird?
Early bird.
Music or no music when you're writing?
Music.
And last one, audiobook or ebook?
Oh, audiobook.
Oh, didn't even hesitate.
No, I know, because I love a book, so I'm either holding a book or I'm listening to an audiobook. And audiobooks allow me to read more books, because then I can have 3 books on the go at once. Can have one that I'm listening to, one that I'm reading in bed, and one that I'm carrying around the house with me. But I can't do an ebook because that reminds me of work, because I look at the screen when I'm writing.
Okay. I have to say, ebooks, nobody ever picks an ebook against audiobook, against proper book. Ebooks are like the kind of bastard child of the family.
They're such good sellers, aren't they?
Oh,
they sell really well.
They're brilliant for
everyone loves them, but is too afraid to tell the truth.
I think that's what it is.
That's what it is. They're ashamed.
Book snobbery.
Book snobbery is exactly what it is.
Well, thanks very much to Jenny for speaking to us. I really enjoyed that chat, and I thought it was interesting. We've had a couple of authors like her before who don't write linear manner.
Yeah, it's an interesting method.
But yeah, it's very interesting, isn't it?
It's part of me that kind of thinks, I'm not sure I could do that without the build up to the scene that I'm writing. I don't know if I would know where I'm taking it, but I guess it's all part of the planning. If you know where it slots in, and also you should write a scene that excites you. If worry about where it slots in later, I suppose. But if you're excited about something, that'll come through, and it'll be more interesting.
That's right. Maybe you get I don't know, 8 scenes or something that you're really excited about, and then you can find ways to join them together or something.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, really interesting. Obviously, her latest book, Me Under the Mistletoe, is out now, so you can grab that. We'll put a link in the podcast description, or you can grab it from the bookshop. It would make, obviously, an excellent Christmas present.
Oh, couldn't get asked for a better present than
that. But otherwise, next week, it's our last episode before Christmas. We're going to take a short break, if you'll allow us that, over the Christmas and New Year period. But it's a very special episode because we have not one but 2 guests next week.
Yeah, Corey Doctorow and Rebecca Giblin are 2 fantastic guests, which we chatted with. We actually chatted with them in person, which was a very nice change. It will be available in video format for those that prefer to watch us as we speak rather than just listen to our dulcet tones. But for those that know them, obviously Corey is a prolific writer. He's written so many fiction, non-fiction books covering topics that span, fantasy, sci-fi stuff. Really interesting guy. And Rebecca is more of an academic. She's coming at this kind of future fellow professor at Melbourne Law School. She's got this really interesting kind of point of view on intellectual property, authors' rights, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, and they've written a book together, Choke Point Capitalism, which you've probably seen something about, talking about these huge monopolistic companies that have control over a lot of creators and how to break that, essentially, is the idea. So it's a really, really interesting chat. As Tarek says, it's also going to be available on YouTube. So that'll be next week's episode. So we hope you can join us for that. It'll be out a couple of days before Christmas, and then it'll stay up.
Our gift to you listeners.
Exactly, that's our Christmas gift to you. But before we go, if you enjoyed this episode, please do take time to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your favourite podcast app.
And of course, anyone wants to get in touch, they can always send us a tweet in the Twitter machine. We are at UK Page 1, or they can drop us an email, which is podcast@rightgear.co.uk.
Or you can get us on Mastodon, if you use that, on writing.exchange. We're at Page 1 Pod. But otherwise, have a great week. Try and stay warm, which is very difficult in the UK at the moment. And we'll speak to you next episode.
See you later.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well, so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UK Page 1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.